Burkina Faso has just pulled off its most decisive military action, yet one that sent shockwaves far beyond its borders. Hundreds of militants were eliminated in a swift and brutal counterstrike. But what lies beneath this news isn't just another headline about rebel groups in the bush. Something much deeper is unfolding. Who's actually financing this chaos? Why has this small West African nation become such a volatile hotspot? And more importantly, how did a country long dismissed as weak suddenly rise to push back so fiercely? When you hear Burkina Faso, you probably don't picture foreign-supplied weapons, encrypted satellite phones, or cross-border rebel networks. Yet that's exactly what this landlocked country is now facing. The attacks, the violence, it's not driven by internal disputes or tribal politics. It's about something else. It's about resistance. A nation refusing to bow to foreign domination. Since 2015, Burkina Faso has been flooded with insurgent forces well-trained, well-coordinated, and well-funded. They aren't random bandits. These groups move with military precision. They cross borders effortlessly, use Western encrypted apps to communicate, and arrive with weapons far more sophisticated than anything desert raiders could afford. These aren't rebels, they are proxy actors in a global game. And ironically, the very countries that claim to be helping fight terrorism have left unmistakable footprints in the sand. After years of foreign military operations like France's Operation Barkhane, the violence didn't subside. It got worse. More militants emerged. Strongholds multiplied. The more foreign boots hit the ground, the more destabilized the region became. These militants didn't just appear out of nowhere. Many originated from regions like Niger and Mali, places where Western forces previously handed out aid with one hand and launched drone strikes with the other. When countries like Mali and later Burkina Faso started to push back and expel foreign troops and diplomats, the attacks became more surgical, more vicious, more focused. They weren't just random acts of terror. They were strategic blows, meant to crush the new government and, more importantly, question the legitimacy of its leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. It wasn't coincidental. It was punishment. So, who truly benefits from all this chaos in Burkina Faso? Not the villagers, not the farmers or children walking miles to school. No, chaos benefits foreign corporations hunting for cheap gold, arms dealers looking to open new markets, and political powers that fear an Africa rising on its own terms. Without foreign aid or supervision, Burkina Faso may not be rich in oil, but it's rich in something far more dangerous: independence, minerals, untapped energy, and the will to govern itself. And that's what truly scares the global elite. Nothing disrupts the status quo more than a country that refuses to be managed. For years, intelligence reports have warned about foreign groups secretly arming so-called moderate rebels. And over time, those very rebels turn into insurgents. It's an old playbook used in Libya, Syria, Afghanistan. Now, that same tactic is repeating itself in the Sahel. But Burkina Faso is not playing along. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's rise wasn't polished or orchestrated. He didn't come from a political dynasty or emerge from a European think tank. He came from the front lines, from dusty barracks and battle-scarred trenches, where real soldiers bled and buried their comrades. His leadership wasn't born out of ambition, it was born out of exhaustion. He simply couldn't watch his country be exploited any longer. At just 34 years old, Traoré became a new kind of African leader, one who wasn't smiling for cameras in Brussels, but squatting in the dirt with villagers, listening to the people the world forgot. From day one, he rejected the old system. He told France that Burkina Faso didn't need military aid if it came with strings attached. And the West reacted predictably. Aid stopped, training programs were cancelled, and the media began painting him as a tyrant. But Traoré wasn't chasing photo ops or diplomatic approval. His actions spoke louder than any speech. He invited military instructors from Russia, not because of ideology, but because they respected Burkina Faso's right to choose its own partners. There were no colonial undertones, no IMF demands, no veiled threats, just straightforward cooperation. Of course, that shift came at a cost. The groups and individuals who once operated under foreign protection didn't vanish. They rebranded, reorganized, and returned. Attacks on infrastructure and villages increased, but Traoré didn't retreat. He expanded supply lines, trained local militias, and launched bold offensives into enemy-held areas. Hundreds of militants were captured or killed, and in many cases, their links to foreign funding and coordination were impossible to ignore. The sudden momentum sparked something the West hadn't expected: hope. Across Africa, people saw a leader who acted decisively, without asking for permission, but it also attracted a new enemy. Not one with guns, but with influence. Inside the army itself, whispers began to spread: quiet dissent, encrypted messages, plans. The biggest threat wasn't out in the forests, it was inside the military ranks. A new plan was unfolding. A coup, quiet, strategic, and foreign-backed. Certain officers, once loyal, had grown disgruntled. Some were seduced by promises of power, others were simply afraid. They formed quiet alliances with rebels who had recently lost ground to Traoré's forces. It wasn't about ideology, it was about control. Their goal wasn't to win a battle, it was to open the gates. From within, the plan was intricate. First, isolate Traoré, politically spread rumors that he was paranoid, unstable, even unwell. Then, destabilize the military from the inside, leak fake battlefield losses, sow fear, and imply Russian betrayal. At the same time, trigger unrest in the capital, confuse the public, and undermine trust. And then, the final blow, stage a coup from within. March on the presidential compound, claim authority, and request international stabilization. A transitional council would be installed, one blessed by the very powers Traoré had defied. Democracy would be the slogan, but the result would be a return to the old model: submissive leadership, foreign control, and endless instability. But the plan failed. Why? Because Traoré saw it coming. Weeks before the coup attempt, intelligence services had intercepted encrypted messages between military officers and insurgent leaders. Coordinates, names, even diplomatic consular codes appeared, signals of foreign involvement at the highest levels. The betrayal ran deep. This wasn't just a coup, it was a counter-revolution. Burkina Faso had become too bold, too self-reliant, too dangerous for the global system that profits from weak African states. And when its people stood behind Traoré, it exposed a simple truth: a nation that defends its dignity is harder to manipulate. The war isn't over. The enemies of self-determination are still watching, still planning. But the message has been sent loud and clear, from the villages to the battlefields to the corridors of foreign embassies. Burkina Faso is no longer a pawn. It has found its voice, and that voice is no longer asking for help. It's telling the world, we know what you're doing, and we will not play along. Instead of responding with public purges or making dramatic headlines with mass arrests, Captain Ibrahim Traoré took a more calculated route. He let the plot unfold just long enough to quietly track everyone involved, and when the time was right, his government struck all at once. The entire network was neutralized in a single, precise operation. Arrests were made. Urban hideouts were uncovered, many stashed with foreign currency, encrypted communications gear, and stockpiles of advanced weapons. But by the time the public heard about the coup, it had already been dismantled. Silently, swiftly, however, the revelations didn't just shock the nation. Even some of Traoré's strongest supporters were shaken by what the investigation exposed. The conspirators weren't just working with insurgent groups. They were also linked to foreign middlemen operating in neighboring countries. These weren't ordinary rebel collaborators. They were part of a deeper network, one closely monitoring internal shifts in Burkina Faso, looking for cracks and preparing to force their way back in through manipulation rather than diplomacy. That's when the reality became impossible to ignore. Not every enemy wears a uniform or waves a rebel flag. Some wear military insignias. Some speak fluent French. Others carry diplomatic passports. In response, Traoré's administration launched an internal audit of the military's command structure. Quiet dismissals followed. Officers with unexplained fortunes were removed from their posts. A new layer of grassroots intelligence was put in place. Local communities now included trusted civilians trained to report suspicious military behavior. This was a homegrown security model, organic, people-powered, and unrepeatable by foreign military blueprints. Still, the damage lingered. The failed coup delivered a sobering lesson. Invasions aren't the only threat to sovereignty. Internal infiltration can be just as dangerous, if not more. It became clear that Burkina Faso now faced a two-front war, one against insurgents in the countryside and another against hidden traitors within. But perhaps the most difficult battle of all wasn't in the forests or army barracks. It was in the villages where the lines between friend and foe blur dangerously. In regions where ethnic tensions can be weaponized, trust becomes a fragile commodity. When militants and soldiers both knock on doors and you're asked to choose, at gunpoint, survival often comes before loyalty. This conflict isn't just geographical, it's identity-based. The Fula or Fulani, a widespread nomadic ethnic group across West Africa, have become a focal point in the insurgency narrative. In Burkina Faso, they are farmers, herders, and traders, but they've also been stereotyped as militant sympathizers. Why? Because insurgent leaders, many from Fulani communities, exploit poverty, displacement, and lack of opportunity to lure young men into their ranks. The promises, money, protection, and purpose. Unfortunately, instead of separating civilians from insurgents, some in Burkina Faso's security forces began to treat entire Fulani communities as suspect. That's where the conflict took an even darker turn. There have been cases where villages cooperated with militants for protection, but the vast majority of Fulani people are not rebels, they're ordinary families trapped between militant threats and military suspicion. And every wrongful raid, every civilian casualty, feeds right into the militants' narrative. Look how they treat your people. We are your only defense. It's more than tragedy, it's strategy. Ethnic division isn't just a byproduct of conflict, it's a weapon, deliberately used to fracture unity and create justification for foreign intervention, under the guise of peacekeeping, because it's easier to control a divided nation than a united one. But something powerful is happening. Local Fulani leaders are rejecting the militant groups that exploit their identity. Community elders have begun organizing local defense units, holding peace dialogues, and even helping to identify foreign-trained infiltrators among them. Under new reintegration efforts, many former Fulani militants have surrendered and are now cooperating with the state, offering critical intelligence in exchange for amnesty. It's a story that global media rarely tells. No, Burkina Faso isn't descending into ethnic war. It's clawing its way out. It's trying to rebuild trust in places long overlooked. Few countries could navigate such a delicate balance and survive. But Traoré's government appears committed to something different. A future where being Fulani isn't a cause for fear, but a respected part of the national identity. Still, reconciliation takes more than speeches. It takes time, trust, and the willingness to admit past mistakes. And the betrayal Burkina Faso faces isn't just ethnic or political. It's embedded in global narratives that pretend to protect while quietly destabilizing. This is where the story deepens. The crisis in Burkina Faso isn't just about fighting insurgents. It's about reclaiming sovereignty. It's about a nation refusing to be micromanaged by outside interests. Yet when Traoré's troops launched operations in Fulani majority areas trying to dismantle insurgent strongholds, they were accused of human rights abuses. When his administration exposed a foreign-backed coup, it was branded authoritarian. How does a nation defending itself end up on trial? Because Burkina Faso is doing what few others have dared. It's saying no to dependency, no to permanent military assistance that doesn't help, no to exporting its resources without reinvesting in its people. It has stopped playing by the rules of a system built to keep Africa weak. And that scares people. What the international spotlight sees as defiance, many Africans view as leadership. Traoré's administration rejected France's military presence. It realigned toward non-Western partners. It questioned the usefulness of UN peacekeeping missions. And instead of accepting debt in exchange for aid, it started building domestic capacity. All of this wasn't supposed to happen, especially not in what was once considered the heart of France's former empire. That's why every move Burkina Faso makes is scrutinized, reframed, and weaponized. The issue isn't democracy, it's Disruption. A disruption of the old narrative that says Africa needs saving, that Africans can't lead themselves. That's why the West obsesses over restoring democracy, rather than supporting the fight against terrorism. That word, democracy, has been used to justify invasions, sanctions, regime change, and occupations in places like Iraq, Haiti, Libya, and more. Burkina Faso could be next, but unlike those cases, Traoré isn't waiting to be rescued. Alongside Mali and Niger, Burkina Faso helped create the alliance of Sahel states, a bold trilateral pact focused on self-reliance, joint border security, and shared intelligence. It's more than an alliance, it's a firewall against recolonization. And it's working. Insurgent groups that once moved freely are now being squeezed. Key smuggling routes are being disrupted. And perhaps most importantly, something is changing in the hearts of rural citizens. Where there was once fear, there's now resistance. Some villagers are starting to refuse insurgent demands because they believe, for once, their government might actually protect them. But you won't hear that in mainstream reports, because this progress is fragile. Burkina Faso is under immense pressure. Its decision to turn away from the West has triggered economic punishment. Foreign funding has been cut. Aid groups have pulled back. The World Bank has delayed development packages, citing institutional concerns. And every policy Traoré introduces is met with criticism in Western think tanks and media outlets. Why? Because in today's global system, failing with foreign support is acceptable, but succeeding without it is threatening. A leader who relies on the West and can't stop attacks is praised as stable. A leader who defends his people without Western permission is painted as a warlord. That's the uncomfortable truth the Burkina Faso crisis reveals. The war on terror is often just a cover, a flexible tool that can either crown or crucify a government based on geopolitical convenience. Despite this, Traoré's administration is pushing forward. It's investing in domestic arms production. It's forming new international partnerships on equal terms, not with hidden strings attached. And it's fostering a grassroots political culture where citizens are active participants, not passive observers. It's messy, it's difficult, but it's real. And maybe that's what frightens the world most, that a landlocked African country, against all odds, is carving its own path forward. If Burkina Faso can fight terrorists, block coups, manage internal tensions, endure sanctions, and still stand tall, what excuse do other nations have? This isn't just a national crisis, it's a political awakening, and the world must now choose. Will it continue to undermine African sovereignty under the banner of democracy, or finally support it? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you believe Captain Traoré can stand against the tide? What role do ordinary people play in safeguarding their nation's future? Subscribe to our channel to follow stories that matter, stories of resistance, self-determination, and real African leadership. Tap the bell so you never miss an episode. Your voice is part of this movement. Let's grow it together.